The clinking of crystal glasses echoed in the private dining room, a sound usually associated with celebration. But for me, it was the sound of my own cage being rattled. My husband, Mark, stood at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, his arm draped possessively around the back of his mother's chair. He raised his champagne flute, a predatory gleam in his eyes as they settled on me. I was seated at the opposite end of the table, isolated. "A toast," he began, his voice smooth and confident, carrying easily across the room. "To my father on his 70th birthday, a man who taught me the value of strength." His gaze flickered back to me, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "And another toast, to my loving wife Eleanor." The words loving wife were coated in venom. "She's a living testament to the fact that you don't need a fancy degree or a sharp mind to run a home. Just a good heart and an even better husband to guide her." His family erupted in laughter, not polite chuckles, but loud, braying laughs that bounced off the expensive wallpaper. His mother, Beatrice, dabbed a tear of mirth from her eye with a silk napkin, patting Mark's hand as if he'd just told the most clever joke in the world. My sister-in-law, Clara, shot me a look of pure pity, which was somehow even worse than the mockery. I just sat there, my hands clasped in my lap, my expression carefully neutral. I absorbed their scorn like a stone absorbs the tide, feeling nothing. They had absolutely no idea that the very ground they stood on was mine. The restaurant they were dining in, the one Mark had booked with such a flourish, was part of a hospitality group I secretly owned. The 7-figure salary that funded his tailored suits and his mother's lavish lifestyle came from a company that was, in truth, my inheritance. He was the CEO in name only, a puppet I had placed on a throne he thought he had earned. You might be wondering why I would let the man I married humiliate me so publicly, so viciously, why I would sit there and take it. For years I had endured it for one reason and one reason only: our daughter, Lily. But tonight was different. I wasn't just enduring it, I was orchestrating it. I needed them all here, fat and happy and arrogant, for the final act. I glanced at Lily, sitting beside me. She had been quietly colouring, but now her crayon was still. She looked up, first at her father, then at me. What they didn't know was that the punchline to Mark's cruel joke wasn't going to come from me. It was going to come from our 7-year-old daughter, and the words she was about to say would wipe the smirks off their faces forever. The laughter slowly died down, leaving a thick, self-satisfied silence in its wake. Mark was still basking in the glow of his own cruel wit, his smile wide. He was about to sit down when Lily's small, clear voice cut through the air. "Daddy!" Every head turned. Lily was looking directly at her father, her expression one of genuine confusion. She held up her purple crayon as if it were a pointer. "Why did you say Mommy isn't smart? She's your boss." A ripple of nervous chuckles went through the family. Mark's smile tightened. "What's that, sweetie? That's silly. Mommy takes care of you and the house. Daddy goes to work." He was speaking to her like she was a toddler, his tone patronizing. But Lily was persistent. She wasn't being defiant, she was simply stating a fact as she understood it. "No," she said, shaking her head. "She is. I heard her on the phone yesterday with that man with the big white hair, Mr. Henderson. Mommy told him that you weren't being a very good CEO anymore, and she said that tomorrow she was going to fire you." Dead silence. The air in the room turned to ice. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Mark's face, which had been flushed with arrogance moments before, drained of all colour. He went so pale he looked like a ghost in his expensive suit. His mother, Beatrice, stared with her mouth agape, her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looking garish. The smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. He tried to laugh it off, a choked, strangled sound. "Eleanor, What have you been telling her? Putting crazy ideas in her head, he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. I met his panicked gaze without flinching. I reached over and gently smoothed Lily's hair, my touch calm and steady. Mark, you know how perceptive Lily is, I said, my voice even and quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the room. She just repeats what she hears. The panic in his eyes intensified. He knew I wasn't lying. He knew that Mr. Henderson was the chairman of the board, and he knew, deep down, that his entire world was balanced on a razor's edge. To understand how a man could build a life on such a precarious foundation of lies and arrogance, you have to go back to the beginning. It all started not with love, but with a calculated deception orchestrated by his mother, the day she found out about my inheritance. 10 years ago, I was a different person. I was quiet, introverted, and adrift in a sea of grief. My parents had passed away suddenly in a car accident just 6 months prior, leaving me alone at 22 with a world of responsibility I didn't understand. My father was a quiet genius. He'd built a sprawling tech empire from the ground up, but he hated attention. We lived in a modest home, drove sensible cars, and never flashed our wealth. To the outside world, we were comfortably middle class. The truth, which I only fully learned after his death, was that I was the sole heir to a fortune and a corporation worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I was terrified and completely out of my depth. It was during this vulnerable period that I met Mark. He seemed like a dream. He was handsome, charismatic, and pursued me with a gentle persistence that felt like a lifeline. He listened when I talked about my parents. He held my hand, and he made me laugh for the first time in months. And then there was his mother, Beatrice. In the beginning, she was the picture of maternal warmth. She'd invite me over for dinner, fuss over me, and tell me I was the daughter she never had. She filled a void I was desperate to have filled. Mark was her golden boy. He was destined for greatness, according to Beatrice. His younger sister, Clara, was always an afterthought, someone to be criticized and compared unfavorably to her perfect brother. I saw the dynamic, but in my naivety, I thought it was just a mother's pride. I was so starved for family and affection that I willingly ignored the red flags. The lie began subtly. When they asked what my father did, I simply said he owned a small software company. It was the truth in a way. I wasn't trying to be deceptive. I was just private, the way my father had taught me to be. The shift happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was at their house for tea, and I'd received a call from Mr. Henderson, my father's long-time lawyer and the chairman of the board. I had stepped into the hallway to take it, speaking in hushed tones about quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. I thought I was alone. When I hung up, I turned to see Beatrice standing in the doorway of the living room, a strange, intense light in her eyes. She held a half-eaten biscuit in her hand, forgotten. "My dear," she said, her voice a silky purr I'd never heard before. "That sounded like a very important phone call. Just how big was your father's small company?" It wasn't a question, it was an assessment. In that moment, the predator behind the motherly mask finally showed its face. I stammered something non-committal, but the damage was done. Beatrice's eyes had a gleam I now recognize as pure avarice. From that day on, her mission was clear. The gentle suggestions about my well-being turned into a full-blown campaign. Suddenly, every conversation was about how I needed to be protected, how a young, grieving woman like me couldn't possibly be expected to manage such a complex business portfolio. It was too much pressure, too much stress. Simultaneously, she began building up Mark in a way that was almost comical in its exaggeration. Mark, who at the time worked a mid-level marketing job he constantly complained about, was suddenly rebranded as a hidden genius and a natural-born leader. Beatrice would sigh dramatically over dinner, saying things like, "If only my Mark had the right opportunity, he could conquer the world. He has the vision, you see. He just needs the platform. Less than a month after Beatrice's discovery, Mark proposed. He took me to a scenic overlook, got down on one knee, and gave a speech so perfect it felt rehearsed. He spoke of protecting me, of honouring my father's legacy, of building a future together where I would never have to worry about anything again. I now know that Beatrice wrote every single word. But back then, I was a lonely girl who wanted to be loved. I said yes. The plan was presented to me a week later, over another of Beatrice's carefully staged dinners. "Elena, darling," she began, placing her hand over mine, "we've been thinking. You and Mark are a team now, a partnership. What if he were to step in as CEO? Publicly, of course." She rushed to add, "You would still be in charge, naturally, behind the scenes, but it would give the company a strong male face. It would protect you from corporate sharks. Mark can handle the stress, and you can focus on building your life, your home." It sounded so logical, so helpful. I was intimidated by the boardroom, by the sea of older men who had worked with my father for decades. The idea of having Mark as a buffer while I learned the ropes from the safety of my own home felt like a relief. I loved him and I trusted him. I saw it as us working together. They saw it as a hostile takeover. What they didn't know was that my father's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was far less naive than I was. He drew up the papers making Mark the CEO, but he also built in an ironclad safety net. I retained 100% of the voting shares. Mark was the face of the company, but I was its heart, its brain, and its owner. His name was on the letterhead, but my signature was the only one that could remove him. They thought they had seized the kingdom, but they had merely accepted a job as its caretaker. For the first few years, the arrangement worked, or so I let myself believe. The company continued to grow, mostly running on the momentum and the brilliant systems my father had put into place. Mark played the part of CEO beautifully. He was excellent at schmoozing, at giving speeches written by the PR team, and at taking credit for the hard work of others. At home, he was still the attentive husband, and the birth of our daughter, Lily, seemed to seal our happiness. I was content to be in the background, raising our child and avoiding the corporate spotlight I so disliked, but slowly, insidiously, the narrative began to change. The lie they told the world began to be the lie they told themselves. Mark started to believe he actually was the genius his mother always claimed him to be. The "our company" became "my company." He would come home from board meetings, which I monitored via conference call from my home office, and explain the outcomes to me in condescending, simplistic terms, as if I hadn't been the one who had given Mr. Henderson the key directives that morning. "It's complex stuff, Elena," he'd say, patting my hand. "Don't you worry about it. Just focus on Lily and making our home beautiful." His mother was his biggest cheerleader in this delusion. He and his mother started to actively diminish my role and intelligence. They needed to believe I was small so they could feel big. "It's such a blessing Mark is here to handle things," Beatrice would say. "A woman's mind isn't built for that kind of pressure." They constructed a new reality where I was the simple, stay-at-home wife and he was the self-made titan of industry. My role as the owner, the true power, was deliberately and systematically erased from our family's history. What they didn't see was what I was doing while they were busy building their fantasy. While Lily napped, I wasn't planning parties or redecorating. I was in my home office, the one Mark thought was for my hobbies, on secure video calls with Mr. Henderson and the board. I was taking online courses in corporate finance and contract law. I was devouring my father's journals, learning not just what he did, but how he thought. I was honoring his legacy not by hiding from it, but by quietly mastering it. My silence wasn't weakness, it was study. My passivity wasn't ignorance, it was observation. I gave Mark enough rope, not to hang himself, but to build his own scaffold. And with every dismissive comment, every patronizing smile, he hammered another nail into place. The facade began to crack about a year ago. The company's steady growth began to falter. The reason was simple: Mark. Bloated with arrogance, he decided he no longer needed the guidance of the old guard my father had appointed. He started making unilateral decisions, chasing flashy, high-risk ventures that had more to do with stroking his ego than sound business strategy. He tried to acquire a failing luxury brand, a vanity project that went against all advice from the board. Millions of dollars began to hemorrhage from the company, my father's life's work. I could no longer just observe. I began to intervene. Through Mr. Henderson, I issued direct orders, vetoing Mark's worst impulses and correcting his course. We sold off the luxury brand at a loss before it could do more damage and quietly righted the ship. Mark was incandescent with rage. He stormed home, ranting about how his board was undermining him, how they were stuck in the past. He never once suspected the orders came from the simple wife sitting across the dinner table from him. He was so blinded by his own perceived brilliance that he couldn't see the truth right in front of him. His professional incompetence was one thing. I could fix that. But the true breaking point came from a different kind of betrayal. As part of my deeper involvement, I had commissioned a quiet, comprehensive audit of all executive spending. I told myself it was just due diligence. Deep down, I think I knew I would find something. The report landed in my secure inbox on a Monday morning. It was worse than I could have imagined. There were thousands of dollars spent on jewelry I had never received, extravagant dinners at restaurants he and I had never visited, charges for a luxury downtown apartment I didn't know existed. The timeline of the expenses corresponded perfectly with his late-night board meetings and last-minute business trips. The picture was brutally clear. My husband, the man who called me simple and unintelligent, was using the money from my father's company to fund a secret life with another woman. A cold, clarifying rage settled over me. It wasn't the hot, messy anger of a woman scorned. It was the calm, focused fury of a queen whose kingdom had been desecrated. The public humiliation, the years of being belittled, I had tolerated for the sake of peace and for my daughter. But this, using my family's legacy, the resources meant to secure Lily's future, to betray our marriage vows. That was an act of war. It was then I knew that simply firing him wasn't enough. It was too quiet, too private. He had built his entire identity on a public lie. His downfall had to be just as public. I began to plan his father's 70th birthday party. The silence in the restaurant was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. We were back in the present moment, the echoes of my backstory providing the grim context for the scene unfolding. Mark's face was a mask of terror. His desperate attempt to laugh it off had failed, and now raw panic was setting in. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This is a pathetic attempt to ruin my father's birthday. You're poisoning our daughter against me. What kind of mother are you?" Before I could answer, Beatrice was on her feet too, her face contorted with rage. The mask of the elegant matriarch was gone, replaced by the snarling face of a cornered animal. "She's an ungrateful witch, that's what she is," she shrieked, her voice shrill. "We took you in when you were a sad little orphan. We gave you this life. My son gave you a name and a family, and this is how you repay him. By turning his own child against him with your jealous fantasies." She gestured around the opulent room. "You think you deserve this? You would be nothing without my Mark." The rest of the family just stared, frozen, caught in the crossfire. Clara, Mark's sister, actually looked down at her plate, unable to watch. I let Beatrice's tirade wash over me. I didn't flinch, I didn't argue. I calmly picked up my glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip, my eyes never leaving hers. I let the silence stretch after she finished, letting her ugly words hang in the air for everyone to appreciate. When I finally spoke, my voice was low and even. "Jealous, Beatrice?" I asked, setting my glass down gently. "What is there to be jealous of? An incompetent executive who nearly bankrupted his own company with a vanity project? Or a man who lies to his wife and family?" I then turned my calm gaze to my husband. His chest was heaving, his face red with a mixture of anger and fear. "You want to talk about gratitude, Mark? Let's do that. Should I be grateful for the thousands of dollars you spent on Cartier jewelry for a woman named Candace? With a K." The colour drained from his face again. Beatrice's jaw snapped shut. "Or perhaps," I continued, my voice as cold and sharp as ice, "I should be grateful for the company funds you used to lease a private apartment at the Carlisle, Unit 15B. Is the view nice from there? You've never taken me." I paused, letting the information sink in. "You've betrayed our family. You've squandered my father's legacy, and you have embezzled company funds to do it. So no, I don't think I am very grateful at all." Mark looked as though I had physically struck him. He staggered backward and collapsed into his chair, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish out of water. Beatrice just stood there, frozen, her face a ghastly shade of white under the restaurant's warm lighting. It was Mark's father, the guest of honor, who finally broke the silence. He looked at me, his old eyes filled with a dawning horror. "Elena, what she said, is it—" He couldn't finish the sentence. I gave him a look of cold pity. Every word. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my phone. I didn't need to look at it. The motions were purely for effect. "While you were all getting dressed for dinner tonight," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "I convened an emergency meeting of the board. Mr. Henderson presided. I presented them with the full audit report on Mark's tenure as CEO." I looked directly at Mark, whose eyes were now wide with a new kind of dread. "Based on the evidence of gross mismanagement, misuse of company assets, and embezzlement, the board voted unanimously. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." I continued, my tone flat and businesslike. "Your corporate credit cards were deactivated an hour ago. Your access to company servers has been revoked. Security will meet you at the office tomorrow at 9 a.m. to supervise you while you collect your personal belongings. Don't be late." I then turned my attention to Beatrice, who was now leaning on the table for support. "The generous six-figure consulting fee that the company pays you each year has also been cancelled, effective today. Furthermore, the deed for the house you live in is held by a corporate trust. I've instructed my legal team to begin eviction proceedings. You'll have 30 days to vacate the property." Her face crumpled. The arrogance was finally, completely gone, replaced by the raw terror of a woman whose entire world had just been pulled out from under her. "You can't," she whispered. "I can," I replied coldly. "You were right about one thing, Beatrice. You said you took me in. You did. You took me for a fool, for a grieving girl you could easily manipulate. You thought you were getting a golden goose, but you forgot that the goose owned the farm." I gestured vaguely at the room. "This restaurant, the crown jewel of your son's supposed success. I bought the entire hospitality group 6 months ago. This meal, this party, it's on me. Consider it severance." I stood up and smoothed down my dress. I reached for my daughter's small hand. Lily looked up at me, her eyes wide. She didn't understand the details, but she understood the shift in power. "Come on, sweetie," I said softly, my voice warming for the first time all evening. "Let's go home, our real home." I walked out of the room without a backward glance, leaving them to sit in the ruins of the lives they thought they had stolen.